Looking at the regular season schedule for the Texas Longhorns, I have changed my tune. It would be a disappointment. Yes, a disappointment if Texas did not go undefeated in the regular season this year.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, once again, why a loss in the regular season for the Texas Longhorns football team would equal disappointment. In the second segment, there are four somewhat big SEC matchups outside of Texas and Mississippi State this weekend. I give my thoughts on those. And then in the last segment, can Quinn Ewers still win the Heisman? He has already missed part of the UTSA game, missed ULM. Most people think he will miss the Mississippi State game. Would Quinn Ewers have a chance to win the Heisman if he does not play this Saturday? All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I don't spend a lot of time, watching ESPN anymore, watching FS1 anymore, in terms of the sports shows and the debate shows and, watching all these people give their opinions and their analysis. Because at this point, it's just all, clickbait and, selling outrage and just doing whatever they can do, to get more people watching and just going up there saying crazy stuff or whatever. But I always used to enjoy, watching the Herd on FS1. And one thing I enjoyed about Colin Cowherd is one thing he used to always say. Right. With new information comes new expectations, right? Or with new information comes new opinions, right? And so now, based on what we've seen from this Texas Longhorns football team over the first four games, I have a new opinion. I have new expectations, right? If Texas were to lose in the regular season this year, any game, it would be a disappointment. Now, we have to, of course, conceptualize disappointment because some people are going to hear that and say, how would it be a disappointment if Texas lost at, such and such or, AYZ, right? When I say disappointment, I'm not saying a failure, right? When I say disappointment, I'm not saying somebody should be fired, right? When I say disappointment, I'm not saying that, if they lose a game, that they can't still win the SEC championship, then go on to the playoffs and win the national championship. What I'm saying is based on what we've seen from this Texas Longhorns football team through 4 weeks, with them being the number one team in the country, any game they lose this year, yes, even including Georgia, would be a disappointment, right? I think coming into the season, we looked at the University of Texas, this Longhorns football team. I think the consensus was they are one of the best teams in the country, right? They talked about Georgia. They talked about Ohio State. They talked about Oregon. Some people said Ole Miss, but Texas was in that conversation and they said Texas is one of the best teams in the country. But now you look at Georgia, right? A team that just struggled to beat Kentucky in their last game. Ohio State has been really good, but they haven't played anybody. Ole Miss, the same thing. They haven't played anybody. Oregon struggled in their first two games against Idaho and Boise State, right? When you look at the University of Texas and how they've played against the teams on their schedule thus far, being the number one team in the country, Colorado State, Michigan, UTSA, and ULM, just blasting all of them, right? None of those games have been competitive. Texas being the number one team in the country. Now, based on what we were saying coming into the year, where they're one of the best teams, I don't think there's any doubt, at least in our minds, right, that Texas is currently the best team in the country, right? They still have to go out there and prove it for 8 more games. But based on what we've seen through the first 4 weeks, Texas looks like the best team in the country. And then coming into the season, we looked at the schedule and said that there were 4 games on the schedule where Texas could, slip up, right? We said this is the SEC. The schedule is going to be tougher. The games are going to be tougher. Most people predicted 10-2. Some people said 11-1. There were some pretty ambitious people that said 12-0, and now that prediction looks better than ever. But a lot of people said 10-2 or 11-1. They expected Texas at some point to, reach some pitfalls on the schedule, right? And the 4 games we identified the most, that were talked about the most in terms of Texas could lose those games, were Michigan, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M. But now you look at this Texas Longhorns football team through 4 games, right? And I think they've been better than we've all anticipated, right? And this is a national championship team, right? I'm going to say it again. This is a national championship team. The quarterback play has been elite. The running game is getting close to being elite. Wide receivers, tight ends, the offensive line, the defense as a whole, the coaching, the play calling, the development, it has all been elite. We went from coming into the season saying Texas was one of the best teams in the country to all of us as a fan base now definitively believing that Texas is the best team in the country. And when you look at these big four teams on the schedule, right? Coming into the season, we said we didn't know what Michigan would look like, but that would be a very tough game for the Longhorns. Then they went up to Ann Arbor and rolled them, right? We talked about Oklahoma. Anything could happen in Red River, and that's certainly still the case. But right now, based on what you've seen from the Sooners, do you think that they can beat Texas? Are you worried about that game at all? Of course, Georgia is still the number 2 team in the country, and anything can happen in that game. But you're telling me now, based on what you've seen from Texas and what you just watched from Georgia last Saturday, not this past Saturday, but last Saturday, only beating Kentucky by 1 point. Kentucky, who got rolled by 28 points by South Carolina. You're telling me now, as a Texas fan, you're still worried about that game? Or you think that if Georgia beat Texas, it wouldn't be a disappointment when Texas has looked significantly better, in my opinion, than Georgia has through the first 4 games, even though Georgia has only played 3 and Texas has played 4. And Texas A&M, I mean, Texas was always better than Texas A&M, but we were giving them credit. Tough road environment, Kyle Field, the renewal of the Lone Star Showdown, anything can happen. I'm telling you now, a loss to any of those 4 teams would be a disappointment. Going through the schedule, Mississippi State this Saturday, come on now. Mississippi State is 1-3. They've lost to Toledo, Florida, and Arizona State, right? I mean, come on now. Oklahoma, like I said, does that look like a team that could or should beat Texas? It would be a disappointment if Texas lost that game. Georgia, I'm sorry, right? They are not, you know what I mean? I know we look at Georgia and Kirby Smart like the boogeyman, and, they're still a great team for sure. That game is at home, right? Texas has a lot of advantages against Georgia, right? Texas's offense is better than Georgia's offense. Georgia's defense may be better than Texas's defense, but look what offense they're going to have to go against. Steve Sarkisian, Quinn Ewers, and all of these elite weapons that have been on display through the first 4 games. I'm saying it now. That game is at home, right? For the Longhorns. If Georgia beats Texas at home, based on what we've seen through the first 4 weeks of the season, that would be a disappointment. Would it be the end of the world? Does it mean Texas still can't win the national championship in the SEC? No. But to me, it would be a disappointment. Vanderbilt, come on, next question, right? Florida, Billy Napier might not even be there. We don't know who's the quarterback's going to be. That would be a disappointment. Arkansas, tough road game. Obviously, going back to the Southwest Conference, a lot riding on that game just in terms of, the rivalries and the memories and, the passion for that game. But, Arkansas is 3-1 right now. That'd be a disappointment for the University of Texas, Kentucky, and then Texas A&M. Come on now. Texas is the best team in the country right now. I wholeheartedly believe that after the first 4 weeks. And if they lost any game on their schedule in the regular season, including Oklahoma moving forward, including Texas A&M moving forward, even including Georgia moving forward, that would be a disappointment to me based on what we've seen from the other teams in the country and based on what we've seen from the Texas Longhorns. To me, this is definitively the best team in the country right now. And they're now in that position that Georgia has been in the last 2 years, just without the championships, where any loss feels like a disappointment. And that's what the rest of this regular season looks like to me. Quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into the big 4 matchups in the SEC outside of Texas and Mississippi State. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Return On You. Return On You is a new platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite athletes. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter referral code Locked On, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited, right? I'm sorry. This week we've selected the player of the week. Hold on. Let me get myself together. Right. Let me get myself together. It's my first time reading the ad read. I'm not even gonna lie to y'all. Right. So they want me to select the player of the week. Obviously, I'm gonna go with Jaden Blue. 4 touchdowns right this week in his return. Missed the UTSA game. Came back with a huge performance. this Saturday to lead the Texas Longhorns to victory in Arch Manning's debut against ULM. If you were impressed as we worked with his performance on Saturday, you can show him some love too. Just hop on Roy, return on you, and throw in a few bucks. If everyone pitches in just $10, it adds up fast for Jaden Blue. Now you have the chance to show your appreciation for Jaden Blue and his standout performance this week, as well as what he'll continue to bring to the Texas Longhorns program. Get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with return on you. Return on you. I'm so sorry, Jaden Blue. I'm so sorry. They changed the ad read on me. Could have been a lot better with that. But yes, please go out and support, Jaden Blue and all of our Texas Longhorn players via NIL, and you can do that on return on you. Today's episode also brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right. So like I said, there are four somewhat big matchups in the SEC this weekend outside of Texas and Mississippi State. As the week goes on, we will discuss Texas and Mississippi State. But, right now we're discussing the other teams that don't necessarily matter as much as the number one team in the country, your Texas Longhorns. So, yes, I got my paper in front of me. I had to write down a bunch of notes. I'm an expert on the Texas Longhorns, not so much of some of these other teams. So I had to write down some notes. Oklahoma at Auburn. Oklahoma currently favored by 2.5 points on the road against Auburn. This is going to be a very interesting matchup, right? We saw Oklahoma make their SEC debut against Tennessee this past week at home, and obviously things did not go well, right? Things got so out of hand that Jackson Arnold, the 5-star quarterback that they replaced Dylan Gabriel with, right? He was supposed to come into this season and, at least Sooner fans thought, like resurrect the program and, lead them to a bunch of key victories in the SEC. And right now that is not going to happen, right? So he was replaced by the electric true freshman, Michael Hawkins. He did come in and, Sooner fans will tell you he made it a game. A lot of people will say, well, Tennessee just kind of, took their foot off the gas. But nonetheless, Tennessee ended up beating, Oklahoma by 10. But at least with Michael Hawkins in there, they showed somewhat of a pulse, right? So now he gets his first start against Auburn on the road, and he's going to bring with him an elite Sooners defense, right? Even though they've given up some explosive, passing plays thus far in the season, this is still a very good elite, Sooners defense under Brent Venables. And so you expect them to go in there and be able to shut down a Auburn team who has some very legit questions at quarterback, right? Between Peyton Thorne and, Hank Brown, they've replaced one and then replaced one with the other, right? Auburn has a huge quarterback problem. All right. And that's why they've lost 2 games to, I just realized I'm saying right again a lot. I have a bad habit of doing that. So I'm going to stop that. When you look at it, Peyton Thorne and Hank Brown have both not been good this year. And that's, one of the biggest reasons that Auburn has lost to Cal and then lost a game to Arkansas. A lot of Auburn fans felt like they should have won that game. So when you look at it, Auburn is also 62nd in total defense, which could be the perfect recipe for a struggling Oklahoma offense. Now, I'm not saying that Oklahoma will come in there and put up 50 points or, Michael Hawkins is the answer or, this Oklahoma team will get right against Auburn necessarily. I just think, Oklahoma is still a very talented football team. I think Michael Hawkins brings a ton of dynamic playmaking skills in terms of what he can do with his arm, but especially his legs. We saw him coming in right away, running the ball a ton, and he's super duper fast. And I just think this Auburn team, right? I just don't think they're, good enough to knock off an Oklahoma team, even though they're reeling. I don't think Auburn can be the ones to knock them off even at home. So Oklahoma -2.5 at Auburn. I think Oklahoma covers. I think they win definitely by at least a field goal, even in Michael Hawkins' true freshman debut in terms of his first start I think Oklahoma beats Auburn by more than a field goal. Kentucky at Ole Miss, right? Kentucky was absolutely decimated by South Carolina a few weeks ago, 31-3, or 3 weeks ago at this point. But then they came back and put up a really good effort against Georgia, right? Number one team in the country at the time. A lot of people were scared, right? Especially, Georgia fans and, people that root for Georgia. It looked like Kentucky might be able to pull off the upset. Ultimately, Georgia was able to win that game 13-12, right? So you don't know which Kentucky, team is going to show up, especially in SEC play. They do have some offensive playmakers, Kentucky, but nobody has been elite thus far through the first couple of weeks of the season. And then you look at Brock Vandergriff, the former 5-star quarterback that committed to Georgia, and you can see why he never really played at Georgia and why quarterbacks like, a quarterback like Stetson Bennett, right? And then now Carson Beck, are playing over him, right? He just never was able to put it all together and really hasn't been able to put it together thus far through 4 games at the University of Kentucky. Now, Kentucky's defense has been really, really good this season, right? That's why they were able to give Georgia a scare. This Kentucky defense, 6th in yards allowed thus far and 15th in points allowed. So can they make it difficult for Jackson Dart, who for the last couple of weeks has been 2nd in my Heisman rankings, going into the next week? He's put up astronomical numbers. And I think the only reason I don't have him number 1 in my Heisman rankings is because he hasn't really played anybody thus far. And Kentucky is still necessarily a nobody compared to, who Cam Ward has played, even though his best win is against Miami. So I don't know, right? But this will be, I guess the first SEC test for Kentucky, necessarily. But when you look at it, Ole Miss is the number 1 offense in the country by a comfortable margin. And I just don't think Kentucky's defense can do enough to make this a game. Ole Miss's offense is averaging like 670 yards a game. I mean, it's insane, averaging like 56 points a game. And Jackson Dart already has 1,800 yards of total offense through 4 games, right? They've just been absolutely elite. And when you look at Ole Miss, their defense has been really, really good as well. Ole Miss favored by 17.5 at home. Big spreads always make me uncomfortable, but something tells me that Ole Miss is going to cover this and they beat Kentucky by at least 21 points. Ole Miss wins big. I think Jackson Dart and that offense continue to roll. Arkansas at Texas A&M in Jerry World, right? Texas A&M favored by 3.5 points. This is a really interesting game, right? Arkansas, should be a ranked 4-0 football team at this point, but they blew a 14-point lead to our old Big 12 friends in Oklahoma State while outgaining them by almost 300 yards, right? If they win that game, they're 4-0 right now, and the SEC has another ranked team. When you look at it, the combination of the quarterback, Taylor Green, and then former Longhorn, Jaquindon Jackson, give Arkansas an elite running game, 16th in the country. But on the flip side, there's some quarterback questions at Texas A&M right now. Connor Weigman still hurt. I know he was listed as the starter on the initial depth chart for the game against Arkansas, but we don't know if he's going to play, right? And if Marcel Reed comes in, he's very excited from a dual threat perspective. We saw him against Bowling Green, throwing for over 200 yards and a couple touchdowns, and I think he had over 70 yards rushing, right? So he can be that really good dual threat quarterback as well. And Le'Veon Moss, after struggling a little bit in terms of yards per carry, only about 3.4, 3.5 against Notre Dame, he's really come on the last 3 games, right? So you have 2 teams that have really dynamic running games. If Marcel Reed plays in terms of their starting quarterback and their starting running back, both being able to run the ball at a high level. The key for this game, Arkansas and A&M, once again, A&M favored by 3.5 points, is can Bobby Petrino's offense outsmart or out-execute Mike Elko's defense enough for Arkansas to come in there and I guess get the upset in a neutral site game in Jerry's World? I don't think so. I'm going to take A&M close. And then the big matchup, the big Saturday night matchup, one of the biggest games in college football all season, certainly the biggest game in the SEC this weekend, Georgia at Alabama. Georgia favored by 2 on the road at Alabama. Of course, Georgia trying to avenge their SEC championship loss to Alabama last year, which ultimately probably cost them a chance to three-peat, right? The first big test of the Kalen DeBoer era, right? This is not Nick Saban on the sidelines anymore, right? You're going against a team like Georgia. Can Kalen DeBoer, with that 90% winning percentage that we've heard of at Sioux Falls and Washington, right? Can he come in and get a huge win in his first big test against Georgia, the number 2 team in the country? Can Carson Beck outplay Jalen Milroe? I think that's what this game is really going to come down to. Alabama's still a really good defense. Georgia arguably arguably the best defense in the country. Which quarterback will be able to make more plays, right? Jalen Milroe with his arm and his legs, or Carson Beck essentially with his arm, right? Trevor Etienne, the big transfer from Florida over to Georgia, right? Will he have his first monster game? Didn't play the first week, had two, solid games the last couple of weeks, but still hasn't eclipsed 100 scrimmage yards in a game. Can he have his first monster game at the University of Georgia against Alabama this weekend? These are the type of games they brought him in for, right? And I think he's going to have a pretty big game in this matchup. Ultimately, Georgia still has an elite defense, and I think they will force Jalen Milroe to beat them on the outside, which I'm not sure he can do. When Texas did that last year, he's improved a lot since then. But, that's still the question mark, right? If you force Jalen Milroe to beat you with his arm and make tight throws on the outside, can he do that? I think Georgia makes more plays offensively, and I think Kirby Smart has his team ready to go after Alabama beat them in the SEC championship. I think Georgia wins and covers. They beat Alabama on the road by more than 2 points. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into Quinn Ewers. If he misses the game against Mississippi State this weekend, does he have a chance to still win the Heisman? All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, so talking about Quinn Ewers' Heisman case, somebody, left this in my comments, and I got to thinking, if Quinn Ewers, right, who already, missed the UTSA game, thankfully in that game, he had 185 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, I mean, that might have been what he was just able to do in the first half anyway, even if he didn't get injured. But he missed the ULM game, and then, we have to see if he's going to miss the Mississippi State game or not. We haven't gotten any word, but like I said, most people expect that Arch Manning will make his second career start this week, and you'll give, Quinn Ewers a couple of weeks to get ready for the Oklahoma game, Georgia game, the tough part of the schedule. So can Quinn Ewers still win the Heisman if he misses part of one game and then 2 games? Right now, Quinn Ewers threw, 3 and some change, right? Or I guess 2 and some change, right? 692 total yards and 8 touchdowns, a 73% completion percentage. So he's certainly still right now one of the Heisman contenders in the country, right? Whether he's 5, 6, 4, wherever you got him, right? He's still somewhat in that conversation. I think at this point, for Quinn Ewers to win the Heisman, especially if he misses the game against Mississippi State, it's going to have to be more about the storyline than the stats, right? Because right now he's already behind, some of those guys at the quarterback position who have put up the gaudy stats thus far. Cam Ward, a Jackson Dart, even Jalen Milroe of 14 touchdowns through 3 games, right? Right now, Quinn Ewers would be behind those guys in terms of the stats, right? And in the Heisman rankings. So I think that, if he were to miss another game, it would be really hard for him to put up those gaudy numbers the way those guys are putting up. And we definitely have to have some, 400-yard, 4 touchdown type of performances in the latter half of the season to really jump up and make it competitive from a numbers perspective. I think the thing that's saving Quinn Ewers and why he still has a chance to win the Heisman, even if he were to miss the Mississippi State game, but it would be very close, is the storyline. Quarterback of the #1 team in the country. Now, this could be messy at the end, right? Because there's going to be some people coming out and saying, hey, Arch Manning won 2 of those games, and I don't know if we've ever seen a Heisman, winning quarterback miss 2 games. I'd have to, look at the data and, see how that's happened. But I do think, right, if this Texas team stays #1 in the country, Quinn Ewers comes back and beats Oklahoma, comes back the next week and beats Georgia at home. They run the table, beat A&M in the Lone Star Showdown on the road. He has some gaudy performances in terms of numbers. They go 12-0, and then they beat either a Georgia, a Tennessee, or an Ole Miss in the SEC championship game. If Quinn Ewers is the leader of the #1 team in the country, the Texas Longhorns, and they are 13-0 SEC champions, and he can get to close to 4,000 yards, 35 to 40 touchdowns, even 30 plus touchdowns, there's a chance that the storyline can beat out the stats, and the #1 team in the country, the quarterback one for the #1 team in the country, Quinn Ewers, can win the Heisman. But it's going to be very hard because, like I said, these guys are putting up numbers left and right. They're going crazy in these offenses, and you expect Ole Miss to be really good, right? You expect Miami to be really good. You expect Alabama and Jalen Milroe to be, really good. In my last Heisman rankings, I had Dylan Sampson, who already has 10 touchdowns through 4 games. Tennessee is a top 5 team in the country right now. Travis Hunter, we don't know what, Colorado is going to do in terms of a records perspective, but he's putting up insane numbers on the offensive side of the ball and then playing elite on the defensive side of the ball as well. So it's going to be an uphill battle for Quinn Ewers to win the Heisman at this point for sure. But I think the one thing he has in his back pocket is the storyline over the stats. The number one quarterback for the number one team in the country, SEC champions, 13-0 Texas Longhorns. If that happens, Quinn Ewers certainly has a chance, albeit slight. He has a chance to still win the Heisman at the end of the season, even if he misses the Mississippi State game. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hug 'em. Peace.